Hello, everybody. We're live and we are here with a very special episode of Watches and Style tonight. It's going to be jam packed with watches and style, specifically James Bond's watches and style through the movies. There are going to be a very specific focus when it when it comes to the watches, especially. It is perhaps predictably a very Rolex centric episode, but we are going to talk about all the six men who have so far represented the character on the screen. We are going to delve a little bit into the prehistory of the watches from Ian Fleming's writing and from aspects of his own style even. And hopefully you will have some questions as well, and I'll be more than happy to answer. Obviously, I came in with a Bond-inspired outfit myself. When it comes to these movies, I never can really decide whether I like the heroes or villains more. So I tried to kind of split the difference and wore something that was very much inspired by Dr. No, and specifically the kind of jacket that Dr. No gives to Sean Connery's Bond in the eponymous movie, Dr. No. So we'll begin right there. I will talk about my Bond watch as well, which I'm wearing now in due time. But without further ado, let's jump right in. I also want to say that this is an episode that was very much propelled, supported, and sponsored by I Love Maldives. I heart Maldives. So please big yourself up, Maldives. I really appreciate you. And if you have any Bond-related questions, whether it is something that is on the screen or not, feel free to field them in the chat, preferably in the form of super chats, and I will do my best to get to them as well. Now, this is a passage from Fleming's novel On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and it is a reference to a Rolex watch. And so it goes. Bond surveyed his weapons. They were only his hands and his feet, his Gillette razor, and his wristwatch, a heavy Rolex Oyster Perpetual on an expanding metal bracelet. Used properly, these could be turned into most effective knuckle busters. So this was how Ian Fleming was referring to Bond's watch in his writing. He specifies it simply as a heavy Rolex Oyster Perpetual on an expanding metal bracelet. There's no mention necessarily of the model, whether he wanted to keep that open or whether he referred to his watch simply as a Rolex or as a Rolex Oyster Perpetual. That is anyone's guess. But as you might know, he himself wore one of the most iconic Rolexes himself, namely a Rolex Explorer, reference 1016. And here you see him as suave as the character that he wrote, with a shawl color dinner jacket, beautifully turned out, and wearing his Rolex Explorer 1016 on its original Oyster bracelet. A lot of these bracelets at the time were still made by Guess Frères, of course, the Swiss jeweler that made these bracelets for Rolex, made, in fact, a lot of bracelets for many other watch manufacturers. If your favorite watch has an iconic bracelet with a very specific design, chances are that it was made with Gefrère. That was, of course, one of the companies, one of the manufacturers that were in time integrated into the industrial behemoth that we nowadays recognize as the leading industry name, Rolex. But at the time, they were simply a supplier. And you can still find on the vintage market some examples of the expanding versions of the Oyster bracelets. Eric Wind Vintage always has a nice selection of them. They can be found in impeccable condition, in restored condition. They are quite finicky. They wear out, as many bracelets from this time period do, from Rolex, but they're part of the fun, right? If you are wearing a watch from the 50s or 60s made by Rolex, and that is the original bracelet that belongs to it, I think it brings a little bit more fun and quirk into the equation, although a lot of those models, of course, work just fine with the standard non-expandable Oyster bracelet, and in fact, later versions of the Oyster and the Jubilee bracelets as well. My other theory when it comes to the reference to Rolex Oyster Perpetual is because, once again, even in that three-word combination, this is very much a generic name for pretty much any Rolex watch, or let's just say more humbly, most Rolex watches, because after all, Oyster primarily refers to Rolex's own trademark of a waterproof, weatherproof, dustproof case. And perpetual, in Rolex's terminology, once again, is simply their way of naming their automatic, their self-winding movements. Those are the movements, of course, that charge your watch with the movement of your own wrist. So a Rolex Oyster Perpetual can be a Submariner, can be an Explorer, can be that entry-level watch that is still called the Oyster Perpetual, but at the end of the day, it does remain a very generic inscription on most Rolex watches, including also the ever so popular GMT Masters as well. And of course, the Daytona over time itself became both an Oyster and Perpetual watch, with the introduction of waterproof cases and automatic movements in those series as well. Ian Fleming became, I think, so much of one, or rather his Explorer 1016 became so much part of his body and his public appearance that it even makes an appearance in his portraits that one can see in the National Portrait Gallery in London. So that's kind of a prehistory, if you will. And I will take you to close-up shots from Dr. No. This is very much Sean Connery's James Bond, and it is, in fact, the first official depiction of the character on the screen. Of course, there is the previous version of the Casino Royale, which most people don't really want to take into the official canon, since it has a much more lighthearted, shall we even say campy approach to the franchise. There are a number of stories about how the Rolex Submariner makes it to James Bond's wrist, to Sean Connery's wrist, specifically here. And some of these theories can go some way to explain why it always appears with either a leather strap or a nylon strap rather than on the original bracelet. The most reliable story is that the current producer of the Bond franchise, Barbara Broccoli, Albert Broccoli's daughter, gave the watch to Sean Connery. And since the bracelet wasn't fit to his wrist, wasn't properly adjusted to his wrist, it became much easier to fit it with a strap and wear it that way. This again, and to me this is very fascinating, is not a very canonical look for Bond's Submariner. In fact, I'm sure many people are already resisting this particular look in their minds, because at the end of the day, Submariner is a dive watch. In fact, it is the iconic dive watch, and a leather strap does not necessarily fit the nautical theme conveyed by a sports watch that is directed to this kind of activity. Nevertheless, Sean Connery wore his Rolex Submariner, a reference 6538, on a crocodile leather strap, on a dark brown crocodile leather strap. This was the scene where he checked the radiation on it with a Geiger counter. Here's a similar piece. This is a big crown Submariner, no crown guards, with the crown, with an oversized crown that is fit to purpose, since it would be easier to grasp whether you are just trying to adjust your watch on the go, but especially if you are wearing the watch in a nautical setting, when you are, let's just say, minimally scuba diving, and you're wearing those gloves, it's so much easier to grasp onto a big crown rather than a smaller crown. This is a later look, perhaps, that we will attend to, but one of the most iconic Submariners in the series, worn quite casually, as you can see here, rather than the earlier look, which is very much part of a suit with the jacket taken off. I believe this is that light gray mohair suit that he changes into when he arrives in Jamaica. And of course, the 6538 appears once again in a perhaps more recognizable look. this time mounted on an ill-fitting nylon strap. It's a regimental number, which seems to fit the background story of James Bond, replicated in so many ways with different versions of NATO straps, but the original strap is understood to be actually a single pass nylon strap with a matching nylon loop, whereas of course NATO straps have that double pass that serves as a protective measure in the case that one of the spring bars pop out or anything else goes wrong on one side of the lugs of the watch. And once again, the ill-fitting nylon strap is described in the same manner, right? There was just nothing particularly at hand that fit exactly the watch that Sean Connery was supposed to wear as James Bond. So a nylon strap was found on the set, purportedly belonging to a crew member, and was fitted with the watch. And here, as you see, it is worn properly over the sleeve of a wetsuit, which seems also as the inspiration to people like Agnelli, who wore their watches later on same way over the sleeve of a dress suit rather than a wetsuit or even a racing suit, right? A lot of gentlemen drivers used to wear their watches also for ease of accessibility and legibility on the sleeves of their racing suits rather than under them, because that would be much harder to access. The reason I took off my watch, by the way, was because I heart Maldives. Thank you for your compliment on the Nehru jackets. If I could choose a watch for Bond today, it would be a Nautilus 5990A. Hey, that's an amazing and a very interesting choice. That's something we can discuss towards the end of the broadcast, but perhaps we can have some of these choices, some of these suggestions trickle in as well as we discuss. Frank V, nice to see you. Yes, there are a lot of Seikos which I won't necessarily talk about today. There's a Breitling Top Time. I think Sean Connery wears in, I want to say Goldfinger in one of the scenes. I'll try to remember that, but it appears very early on, and I'm pretty sure it is Connery's Bond. Maybe it is Thunderbolt, because the Submariner is still there, but there's also a modified Breitling Top Time that again comes up in a Geiger counter situation. So thanks for those reminders. And yes, Omega made a lot of money on these Bond NATOs that were actually simply rendered as gray stripes on black, which, of course, in lower quality still images captured from the movie rendered this particular regimental stripe in that color combination. So the reason I took off my watch was because mine is kind of a mix of styles. that is very much inspired in this particular case by the way that Sean Connery wears his in Dr. No, with lightly padded. In fact, it's actually quite a substantive padding. Dark brown crocodile strap that has become very ratty over the years. I don't buy crocodile straps anymore, so that's why it's gotten that way. Once this wears out, I might be completely back to either wearing it on the bracelet or those gunmetal gray NATO straps that I am very fond of. I'm going to show that as well. This is what I usually use for my Submariner, and it's a great complement for kind of the grayscale theme that a vintage Submariner takes over the years. And as I mentioned, the way I wear it is very much modeled after the way Sean Connery wears his 65-38 in Dr. No. And the 55-13, which is the reference of my Submariner, will come into focus a little later in the franchise. But Sean Connery's 65-38 is perhaps the Rolex Submariner that has become one of a piece with the character, with its on-screen depictions, and it is perhaps most memorably associated with the Bond character. When people go hunting for a vintage Rolex Submariner, the 65-38 Big Crown is one of the most reliable choices, one of the most popular choices, and it's easy to understand why. Of course, through the years, through the decades, Rolex has produced many tool watches, many sports watches that are fit to purpose and that are great for everyday wear, even in their 50s and 60s iterations. But I think one of the reasons that they have become so popular, at least for previous generations, and I include mine in those generations as well, is because Bond wore them, and Bond wore them also with so many different outfits, so many great choices. And we will talk a little more after we cover the main choices, the main watches, about the outfits that go with those watches. But you can already see here him wearing the watch on a leather strap with a suit, with a polo in a much more casual setting. Over a wetsuit, of course, which is this watch's natural habitat. And with this beautiful cream dinner jacket with peak lapels. Where he is timing the explosion that he was about to cause in Goldfinger. Now, the second Bond on the screen, who, for better or worse, and I think for the worse, had a very short lifespan, was George Lazenby. And I mean his lifespan as James Bond, of course. thankfully, Lazenby, unlike the late Sean Connery and the late Roger Moore, is still very much alive and kicking. He was the Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and he actually also wore a Rolex Submariner as well, even though that Submariner, which was a 5513, is overshadowed in popularity by an arguably more interesting piece. But here he is in, again, a classic formal outfit. Peak lapels. Of course, the lapels covered in silk, as is customary for these dinner jackets. And an interesting choice for the shirts, with a kind of ruffle front. Perhaps this can be attributed to the late 60s vibe of the time, of perhaps also the kind of Beatle Bond that Lazenby represented or felt like. Here's another shot of that Submariner. Quite distinctive with its classic black dial, as well as the dive timing bezel from the other Rolex that he wore from this movie, which is, of course, a different complication as well. This is the kind of Submariner that he would have wore at the time. A late 60s meters first Rolex Submariner, a two-liner reference 5513. As you can see, the crown is still quite big, but this time it is surrounded by two crown guards. This is a matte dial. The earlier gilt dial versions are arguably more appreciated by the market, and they can be quite stunning in their own right, even though I'm myself clearly, and for obvious reasons, biased towards matte dials, especially with this kind of patina. And I think it looks just great on the full bracelet as well, even in the setting of this particular kind of occasion and with this kind of more formal outfit. Here, perhaps one should make a caveat because the conventional rules, the traditional rules, would actually ask for a time-only dress watch for such occasions, perhaps preferably in precious metal. And of course, that is all understood. There are two things that I want to say on that particular point. One, we live in a day and age where all bets are off and where people, sartorially speaking, and perhaps beyond that, are barely following any rules at all. So there's nothing particularly untoward or unacceptable about wearing a sports watch as long as everything else is hitting the right notes. Now, that is my personal opinion, and it might not be necessarily common sense. It might not be widely accepted for one reason or another. either because people are much more conservative or because they are much more liberal when it comes to these sorts of sartorial choices. I think it's fine. But one has to also always keep the context in mind. And the context here is, of course, a fictional character, right? James Bond, a man who is debonair, a man who knows all the rules, but also how to break them in his own way, and a man who has over the years cultivated his own sense of style, so he can also on occasion perhaps step over them or even aside them perhaps more lightly, so he can wear his most reliable Rolex, in this case, a Rolex Submariner reference 5513, with a dinner jacket as well, with a tuxedo as well. And I think when it comes to that, just my general suggestion, wasn't he wearing a kilt with that shirt? Yeah, who knows what exactly George Lazenby is doing at any given point. The other thing I want to say about breaking these kinds of rules is, unless you are a true rebel, a renegade, and you really at least think that you have your sense of style and you can do whatever you want, if you are the average person who has some measure of cognizance and even perhaps also a sense of anxiety when it comes to these kinds of situations where formal attire is required, or even where you're asked to go business casual for something, don't let go of everything all at once, right? If people are asking for business casual, wear everything, maybe leave the tie and pocket square at home. If people are asking for formal attire or a tuxedo and a nightgown for the ladies, try to get everything right and maybe wear a sports watch. Try to get everything else right. Get a proper dinner jacket for yourself that fits you well, that is not rented. Get a proper bow tie. For God's sake, don't wear pre-tied things that look so artificial and even comical. Wear, again, a nice shirt with a cutaway, if not necessarily a tuxedo shirt with linked cuffs. And maybe take a small liberty here and there, wear matching pants with your tuxedo, with silk stripes following the outer seam that coordinates with the facing of your lapel. If everything else is right, why not do one or two quirky things, right? Some people like wearing black watch, tartan pants for a black tie situation. Some people like wearing velvet jackets, smoking jackets for that kind of situation. But you will usually see those kinds of people try to get everything else right. Long story short, I think if you're doing most things right, if you are getting most things right, and if it looks like you are paying attention, that you know the rules in a general way, no one will really get picky about the watch you are wearing with your dinner jacket. And if they do, you can just tell them to go fuck themselves. Or more kindly, get over themselves. So this is the first Rolex that George Lazenby was wearing on Her Majesty's Secret Service, on Her Majesty's Secret Service. But he was wearing a watch that is arguably a little more interesting, and you can see how distinctive that watch is, even though it is recognizably a Rolex watch, if only from that oyster bracelet as well. This is a chronograph, and as you can see, it is a chronograph with a silver dial. This is a watch apparently that was bought for the express purpose of the movie from Bukhara as well. And it is a 6238. Frank V, thank you so much. All the watch brands on all the movies. I'll try my best. I will go to the Breitling. I will certainly include Omega. And maybe I haven't really prepared for this, but maybe I will scour the internet towards the end also for some of the Seikos. How about that? Billy Jeans, nice to see you as well. Guys, thank you so much for your support. I really, really do appreciate you. And while you're at it, feel free to hit the like button as well. I will do my best to add to the coverage all the other brands as well, even though my initial preparation is admittedly very Rolex-centric. You're looking right now at a Rolex chronograph, that is usually called a pre-Daytona because it comes from an era before the introduction of the Daytona. And it is a watch, again, the reason it is called pre-Daytona is when it comes to the mechanism, it is pretty much reliably Valjoux-based movement that will, of course, be used in the Rolex Daytonas that will succeed these models as well. The case size is right around 36 millimeters. Again, not altogether different from the Rolex Daytonas that will succeed these pieces. Of course, these watches don't have a tachymeter bezel of any sort. Whether it is in matching metal or in the way of those bakelite inserts. This particular piece, unlike many other examples of the 6238s, is fitted with a red chronograph seconds hand, and that was apparently also a special request by the crew for the movie. And it is a watch that exchanged hands seemingly a couple of times, perhaps a few times already in this century. It was bought and I wasn't able to trace this back, but apparently it was bought from a Christie's auction first. In 2008, it was through a private sale sold to another collector who gave it to the Art Curial auction house for an auction in Monaco. But before it made it to that auction as lot 400, it actually vanished into thin air, so to speak, which is what usually happens when these kinds of super attractive watches with interesting provenance come up on public auction. Sometimes interested parties reach out to the auctioneers and possibly also to the current owner to try to arrange a private treaty sale. So perhaps that's what happened for the 2016 Art Curial auction. I think a similar thing happened when this watch resurfaced again, this time for a 2019 Antiquorum auction, I believe in Geneva. Again, I don't know what happened. I don't know whether the owner at the time decided to keep it after all, or sold it again to another collector through a private sale. All ears if you have that sort of information, but this is a watch that is understood to be unique, specifically because of that red seconds hand. Of course, without the right provenance, something like that can be faked. But this was the particular watch that came up on Art Curial Monaco in 2016, and then later in Antiquorum in 2019. This is not a Daytona. It is a Rolex chronograph, but it is what they call pre-Daytona. I'm not playing semantics here. The reason is this is a Rolex chronograph that's, as you can see, aesthetically different due to its smooth bezel and the tachymeter inscribed on the periphery of the dial rather than on a bezel, whether that is fashioned in matching metal or in the form of some sort of an insert. So these are the chronographs that Rolex made in a variety of references before the Daytona came into being. And this particular piece is the reference 6238. And to address your question specifically, no. A Rolex chronograph, if I'm not blanking out here, was only worn by one Bond in that one movie, and that's George Lazenby in On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Which makes me think that they have to do something about the king with the naming of the next Bond movie. No? What do you guys think? And also, I want everyone to kind of throw recommendations. What would be your choice for a modern Bond watch? Let's treat a hypothetical scenario. Let's say they cast a new Bond and maybe they want to go into a collaboration with a new brand. Maybe their agreement with Omega has already expired and they want to go into a different deal with a different brand, a new endorsement, so to speak, a new product placement, what would be your brand of choice? What would be your watch of choice? I Heart Maldives came up with a provocative suggestion earlier, choosing a Patek Philippe Nautilus 5990A, which is, of course, a watch that reliably combines two rather popular complications: the travel time and the self-winding chronograph with the flyback function. In the iconic design, the Jarajanta design Nautilus. So this is Lazenby's Rolex chronograph, the reference 6238, that he wore interchangeably with a 5513 on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Here's another shot of the same watch, again distinguished from most examples of the same reference, with a red small arrow pointed centrally deployed chronograph seconds hand, I should say. And what next for Mr. Bond? One of my favorite Bonds, probably my second most favorite Bond. I have to go with Sean Connery if I have to make a choice. Roger Moore, and most certainly in my favorite movie of his era in Live and Let Die, and perhaps in one of the most recognizably tricked out Bond watches of all time. This is the Buzzsaw watch that will help him, in fact, cut through those ropes in the scene. It was, at least according to the plot of the movie, modified by Q, so dearly portrayed until very, very recently by Desmond Llewellyn. Here is that Buzzsaw 5513. Which was actually sold on public auction in 2015 by Philips, actually, and for what was then a very considerable amount, 363,000 US dollars. But of course, even though the market has cooled down from the heights that it has reached in the post-pandemic era, something like this would most certainly still attract the right kind of buyer and probably bring multiple times that amount that it has reached almost a decade ago now. That's an interesting suggestion. Female 008 with a Bamford forged carbon Daytona. That is, in fact, a provocative suggestion. Frank V says he should wear a Yachtmaster 2 to count down a nuke. That's actually a great suggestion. Too bad that Rolex itself decided to discontinue the Yachtmaster 2. Again, I'm obviously very biased, but the Submariner 5513 is probably my favorite Bond watch of all time. I like it, yes, because of that particular trick that Roger Moore's Bond reliably uses to cut through the ropes in Live and Let Die in that memorable scene. And you can see the bezel is in fact visibly modified here with those shark fin teeth rather than the usual aesthetic of a dive timing bezel. But also because of its pure aesthetics. It's a time-only watch with a beautifully balanced style, the symmetry of which is not interrupted by any complications. There's no date window. The writing, the inscriptions, the signatures on the dial are not excessive. I think the two-liner indication at 6 o'clock for the model and the depth rating beautifully counterbalance the Rolex coronet and branding, Rolex Oyster Perpetual at 12 o'clock. It is very much the perfect watch for most occasions, and for me, it will forever remain that way. Although, of course, there are many technically superior and perhaps more aesthetically adventurous and even more pleasing watches, but one could hardly find an event, an occasion, a setting where something like this, where a watch like this would be inappropriate, especially in year 2024. So my vote will have to remain for a no-date Submariner, and why not bring back something vintage? Here, you can see Roger Moore with the same watch in a later incarnation from the franchise. This is from The Man with the Golden Gun, where he has Christopher Lee, of course, across him as Scaramanga, as the Man with the Golden Gun. And one of the reasons one of the things that made me choose this particular still is also the styling of the shirts. This is a style of shirts that has, again, become very reliably associated with Bond, even though the origins of those turn-back cuffs are quite murky. Turnbull and Asser claims to have invented them, and they have, over the years, quite reliably provided shirts for the Bond franchise. Foster also argues that he has, in fact, made most of the shirts, and he has come up with this particular style of cuffs, which are also called cocktail cuffs. Again, it's not for me to decide, but probably Turnbull and Acer is your best bet to get the kind of general styling that you can see in the Bond franchise and the cocktail cuffs too, although of course any tailor with whom you can bespeak shirts should be able to adapt or come up with a style that would accommodate it. And it's a very unique, I have to say, styling. I would not go with it myself. I think it comes up, it comes through as a little bit affectatious, I think, in terms of today's style. But again, I love seeing it every time when I take a glance on certain shots from Sean Connery's rendition or Roger Moore's rendition. And it is something, again, that really exudes the air of that debonair elegance when it comes to the kind of Bond that Connery and Moore brought to the screen. This is Timothy Dalton, of course, again, in a very beautiful and classically appropriate style of a dinner jacket. The shawl collar dinner jacket in a variety of iterations keeps coming back in the Bond franchise, and it is one of those articles of style that we will talk about towards the end. And it is rendered here by Dalton's character in a black version. Again, I think it's a great choice. Most people these days, if they go with a proper dinner jacket at all, would go with a peak lapel with silk facings. Shawl collar kind of is a throwback to a more relaxed style, right? As if you are wearing like a nice cozy cardigan that's styled in the same way. I think it would be appropriate, especially in events where you might be hosting, where you feel particularly at home, even as a guest. It certainly has the look of someone who is a little more at ease in this kind of an attire, as opposed to the more predictable but also absolutely cool choice of peak lapel, which goes great with a double-breasted jacket, of course. Very appropriate. Now, I did promise to bring in other kinds of brands, and this will be such an occasion. You're looking at Timothy Dalton from The Living Daylights, where he was wearing, in fact, another kind of dive watch. Oh, Maldives. I will. You are right, actually. You're right. In fact, it goes with going back to Roger Moore. He he says, I think, sheer magnetism, right? When he's using the magnets to unzip the dress. That's a great touch. And yes, this watch was basically gutted completely and is entirely unfunctional. The Buzzsaw Submariner 5513 that was sold. And you can also see here that it doesn't have a second hand, for example, which is one of the many visible signs of that sort of heavy modification. So coming back to Timothy Dalton and the Living Daylights, in many ways, maybe of all the six Bonds who have so far, of all the six actors who have so far rendered this character on the screen, Timothy Dalton is perhaps the most underrated. I think the more rugged, aggressive, and physical style that he portrayed was perhaps not well received at the time. But I would say, if anything, it aged well because in many ways, after the Bourne series as well, that franchise that perhaps propelled Bond to renew itself, contemporary Bond also has become much more of an action hero than he ever was, right? In a way, perhaps it hasn't lost its sense of humor completely, but if you were to put Daniel Craig's rendition against Sean Connery's original, or in fact, especially against Roger Moore's rendition of a Bond, you will get exactly what I mean, right? Especially Roger Moore's take on the character was much more tongue-in-cheek, with a more, you might say, flamboyant sense of style, with a more heightened sense of humor that is foregrounded, with a campier attitude even. So Timothy Dalton was, in so many ways, with his particular take on the character, was ahead of his time and perhaps is more closer to Daniel Craig's Bond than any of the past portrayals of the character. And he was wearing in this movie actually a Tag Heuer night dive, which has a luminous dial. You can see a similar watch right here with a quartz-powered movement. However, he also wore a Rolex Submariner, which I believe was a 16610, but certainly a Submariner date. And probably of a contemporary incarnation. So Dalton's Bond in the Living Daylights wore both a Tag Heuer dive watch, the night dive with the luminous dial, and a Rolex Submariner date, presumably a 16610, such as the watch that you are seeing right here. And I think, again, he is underappreciated, but perhaps once you look back at some of these movies, especially looking back after the Daniel Craig era, you might find something redeemable about the action-packed rendition of the character. Now we come to the Bond that was my first Bond on the screen. Pierce Brosnan with GoldenEye was the first Bond that I saw in a movie theater. So he has, for that reason, a certain sense of attraction for me. I do have an affinity for his rendition. Again, in retrospect, it might seem relatively safe in his choices. It might seem that he perhaps came up with a version of Bond that borrowed freely from some of the favored aspects of all the greats who have preceded him, especially Sean Connery and Roger Moore. But at the end of the day, I don't really want to find too many faults with him, perhaps because I'm partial towards him, but also because he's just an altogether a very likable person and a great character, really, also off the screen and off duty as well. And I really admired his sense of style, which is a little bit different, of course, compared to the classic Savile Row inflected English style of the earlier movies. Brosnan's Bond was fitted out, suited by the Italian brand, by the Roman brand Brioni. So the shoulders on his suits are a little more padded, a little more distinct, as is quite common with a certain sense of Roman style. And he also has, to go with that flashier, perhaps, wardrobe, a new watch as well, and that is the Omega Seamaster Professional. And in the movie, actually, at first, and here he is in another great outfit. I mean, this is like a light gray plaid suit. Beautiful. A three-piece, again, with his Seamaster peeking out from under the cuff. With Desmond Llewellyn, again, as his quartermaster, as his Q. And this was the 254180, the quartz-powered version of the Omega Seamaster. Also, the watch of choice for the current Prince of Wales, Prince William, as it was a personal gift by his late mother. So this is a watch that he continues to wear on a pretty regular basis. It is, in Prince William's case too, the quartz-operated version. I don't know, being very much a Rolex guy, I also have a soft spot for this particular piece as a Bond fan. For this particular version of the Seamaster Professional, I know a lot of people think of this bracelet as an antiquated piece of design, both in terms of its aesthetics and even for the way it wears, excuse me. But I kind of like it. It goes with the general styling of the watch. The scalloped bezel, I think, is always very nice to grip. Again, some people will nitpick about its clicking and everything else. Fits with the general picture, if you ask me. The lugs are similarly with those scalloped design, kind of reminiscent of lyre lugs that are very distinctive of a certain case designer, which has been used reliably by brands like Omega, and also for the Universal Genève Paul Rauter as well. The release valve here is a little more subtle in these earlier versions of the Seamaster Professional Diver, Seamaster Professional 300. And what I like most is, again, that guilloche style wave motif that decorates the dial. That's very subtle, and that gives, again, a very subdued play of color to the dial as well. Of course, for the most part, it is a very deep blue, but that texture is really everything. I could nitpick about the skeletonized hands and all, but there are so many variations of the Omega Seamaster, both from the more classic neo-vintage era and later, that you sometimes have to make certain concessions, certain compromises when it comes to watches that fit with a certain character, with a certain movie, with a particular depiction. And this Seamaster Professional 300s, as it was worn by Pierce Brosnan, is very much that. Of course, this watch also comes with a self-winding movement. The reference number for that is 253180. And that's also one of the best bargains in the neo-vintage market today. Still, you can find many well-kept, well-preserved examples of this watch, of the 253180, the version of the Bond Seamaster with an automatic movement. It's such a great deal if you like the styling of the watch, if you are a Bond fan, and if you are a fan of the Omega Seamaster. Certainly a worthy addition to any collection. And I think, again, this particular photograph gives you a good appreciation of how that wave motif gives such a great depth and visual interest to that dial. Mr. GMT, I didn't know your wife was on the mend. Please send her my best wishes. And yes, Ryan Joffrey, thank you. That's a great cue for what I was going to talk about next, because one of the interesting things about the Casino Royale being, in my humble opinion, the strongest movie of the Daniel Craig era. It is a transitional movie when it comes to the wardrobe in so many ways. The dinner jacket that Vesper gifts or gives Bond is a Brioni jacket, unlike the rest of the wardrobe, which had now been given over to Tom Ford, who was at the time very much emergent as a designer under his own eponymous brand. Of course, he had many successful stints before, perhaps most famously with Gucci. But the Brioni jacket and the Omega Seamaster Professional, the 253180, is actually a throwback to a previous era of Bond, to the Brosnan era, and he really wears it well in the casino scenes, again with the dinner jacket. And one of the great things about the Daniel Craig era, even though he as an actor very much took his own path and forged his particular approach to the character, the movies themselves have so many references, so many throwbacks, so many Easter eggs that pay homage to earlier Bond movies, that it is an art that they seem to perfect finally with this most recent iteration. And I expect that to be a recurrent theme, no matter whom they might cast as the next Bond. I'm sure there will be many subtle and not so subtle references to previous Bonds, to preceding eras, to the actors who have formerly portrayed this iconic character so reliably and so appropriately in the past. This is from Casino Royale, Daniel Craig's Bond, across Mads Mikkelsen's Le Chiffre, and he is wearing a dive watch, as Bond usually has done, as Bond has worn previously with his dinner jackets, usually in the form of a Rolex Submariner, but here it is a watch from their crosstown rivals, namely Omega, the Seamaster Professional that Pierce Brosnan also wore before him. The reference is 253180 once again. And here's that Brioni dinner jacket with the peak lapels and the distinctive shoulders with that recognizable roping. Vesper famously says, "I sized you up that first time I saw you on the train." This is the jacket that Bond finds laying on his bed, seemingly perfectly tailored for him. In an interesting way, Daniel Craig, again, as an example perhaps of going his own way, has worn certain pieces from his own wardrobe, apparently. this was one of those occasions. This is from Spectre, if I'm not mistaken, where he's wearing actually an outfit by and large from Brunello Cucinelli. A kind of sand brown jacket, a pair of gabardine chinos that are, let's say, in a fawn color, and a braided leather belt, again, by the same brand. Presumably from Craig's own wardrobe, or perhaps merely suggested by him. Frank V, thank you. $4.99. Daniel Craig, not my favorite, but is a stylish Bond with the Crockett & Jones Isley boots and Crockett & Jones chukkas. My favorite Daniel Craig is actually another kind of chukka boots that I will bring up at a later time. But interestingly, this is one of my favorite outfits from his era. I know it's very casual. I know it's somewhat unlikely, but I'm a huge fan of knit ties myself. And I think in terms of the color palette of the Moroccan desert scenes, this particular outfit just fits perfectly. This, by the way, is, of course, from the Casino Royale. Where he's wearing another Omega watch. And it is a Planet Ocean, even though I'm not sure if it's the Mr. GMT Planet Ocean. Thank you so much, $5 Australian. Thank you for the kind words about my wife. I hope she's doing well. I hope she's doing much better, Mr. GMT. The Quantum of Solace Planet Ocean Omega is my favorites. I want to double check that because I may have included it in my pictures. Not exactly, but I have included a number of Planet Oceans, but I will bring that up. I'm holding it in reserve, but he is wearing a Planet Ocean here, Daniel Craig, and that is this particular piece. This is a reference 2900 5091 on a rubber strap. And apparently he wore in Quantum of Solace a similar piece as well, which Omega quite reliably rendered as a limited edition as well, which I will bring up for Mr. GMT in a little bit. But here is another Planet Ocean that Daniel Craig wore as Bond. In Skyfall. And apparently that was expressly manufactured for the movie because it had a titanium case. And that particular one was also auctioned later by Christie's and sold for 200,000 euros in 2012 as well. I want to take a quick break here. If you have enjoyed the show, if you have learned something from it, please hit the like button. If you have any questions related to the Bond franchise, the clothes, the watches, or the overall style, any comments, feel free to send them in. Ideally in the form of super chats. I try to get to everything, and there's much more to come, especially when it comes to clothes in this broadcast. So stay tuned. I'll just take a 2-minute break. I'll leave you with this scene, or with this still rather, from Spectre. Daniel Craig and the beautiful Léa Seydoux. Madeleine Swann. I'll be right back. And yeah, feel free to drop your favorites for the Bond girl as well. Who was your favorite Bond girl? Okay, we are back. Thank you for your patience. Bruce G says, I'm a big fan of Rachel Weisz. Same. My favorite is Eva Green, to be honest. Eva Green as Vesper is my favorite. We're looking at a relatively rare sighting of Brunello Cucinelli in the Bond franchise, apparently a personal favorite of Daniel Craig, in off-duty settings as well. So it may have crept in that way, but it certainly looks appropriate to that particular setting. These were a couple of different Planet Oceans that Daniel Craig's Bond wore over the years through the movies. And here is the Seamaster that he wore for Spectre. This was a limited edition. And it's the Seamaster 300 that has more of a heritage inflected design with the lollipop seconds hand and the broad arrow hands as well. And as you can see, it is mounted on that distinctive NATO strap that has been very successfully commercialized by Omega. And it has been compellingly argued that the origin of this particular color combination is in fact low quality, grainy stills captured from the classic movie Goldfinger, when Sean Connery's Bond famously times the explosion at the beginning of the movie, and his dive watch that is mounted on an ill-fitting nylon strap famously again comes into sharp focus. Perhaps one of the successful versions of these commercialized limited editions, a watch that had, I think, a little bit of a wider appeal beyond the usual Omega collector or even the average Bond fan, was this particular special edition that was released with the most recent Bond movie so far, No Time to Die. And it was, I think, quite popular for a number of reasons. One, it is a design that is very much vintage inflected, and it does that, I think, without overdoing it in a way. I know we are reaching perhaps the point of exhaustion when it comes to the trends that a lot of us call faux Tina, this sort of aesthetic effects that is achieved on the dials to make them look aged, even though they are fresh out of the manufacturer. But here, I think the color scheme is very beautifully coordinated between the luminous material on the dial and the similarly colored, kind of eggshell colored accents or graduations, in fact, on the dive timing bezel. The titanium construction, which not only characterizes the case, but also the Milanese style mesh bracelets that fits the diver just perfectly. And I think also the déployant mechanism that makes it fit nicely and that makes it wear quite well. I think it makes for a very distinctive, unique watch that can be worn quite reliably as a sports watch without feeling any particular sense of affinity or affection towards the Bond franchise. I think this was probably my favorite release from Omega in terms of the limited / special editions that were coordinated with the movies. I Heart Maldives says Martine Beswick, Dora from Russia with Love, and she came back as Paula Kaplan in Thunderball. She was so good, she came back. Yeah, that's she was a great Bond girl, and obviously you have your finger on the pulse there. They wouldn't have made her come back if she weren't that good. The No Time to Die NATO copied more that original Rolex NATO. Well, I mean, the NATO itself is not Rolex, but I know what you mean. Yes, Omega later released NATO straps that were more closely replicating the regimental scheme of that early nylon strap as it was used in the Goldfinger movie. As we are switching gears to clothing a little more, for which I have availed myself quite freely of Bond Suits, bondsuits.com, that has been so beautifully curated by Matt Spicer over the years. So I will more freely go back to some of the information and some of the visuals that he has curated as I talk about some of the outfits. But we have already begun talking about them in terms of the reliability of the dinner jackets, especially as they are combined with dive watches, whether it is an Omega Seamaster Professional more recently, or Rolex Submariner more traditionally. Here's George Lazenby once again from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Sean Connery from Goldfinger. And that's a good point to segue into that beautiful dinner jacket from Dr. No. This is probably one of my favorite articles of clothing when it comes to Bond. It's actually a piece that registers to a certain extent black at first blush, but it is actually midnight blue. And it has, again, that distinctive styling of turn back cuffs that is here sometimes called gauntlet cuffs as well. I think I would be more receptive to this kind of styling on a jacket, especially on a jacket worn to a black tie event. Again, in combination with the shawl color, it really fits well with the more laid back approach to what is otherwise a very formal outfit. And as you could see, of course, the silk on those turn back cuffs replicates the silk facings on the shawl color of the jacket as well. The buttons, as you can see, are also covered, which is the traditional approach when it comes to the dinner jacket. A similar number in Thunderball. The shawl color in this case is perhaps a little more narrow and straight compared to the earlier piece we saw that was in Dr. No. They have a little more belly here, which I think may have come back in our time rather than the more straight and narrow lines of this particular shawl color. Right? If you are going to make a choice like that, a bold choice, as it were, you might as well go all the way and wear something with recognizable shawl colors. Here's Dalton wearing a similar jacket, but in a distinct black version. And again, with a more distinctive shawl color in the living daylights. Oh, this is a good one too. I'll bring some up. I Heart Maldives. More than the tux, I think of the safari suits when I think of Bond. I even like some of the tactical stuff that Pierce Brosnan wore, honestly. I don't know, it might just be me. But I like a lot of the styling, honestly, but the dinner jacket seemed to be a little more distinctive. Here is, again, another Dr. No inspired shawl color dinner jacket in midnight blue with the turn back cuffs as well. this time worn by Daniel Craig's Bond in The Quantum of Solace. A similar number in Skyfall. And even in No Time to Die. Again, that throwback quality, that penchant of referring to earlier Bond movies, to the legacy of the franchise at large, is very much alive when it comes to the most recent era of Bond. And I honestly, it is something that I deeply enjoy, and it is something I hope they continue. Nice, Ryan. I think you were mentioning above that you have a shawl color Corneliani ceremonial tuxedo with an Eton turned down color shirt, covered plackets with the same white braces Bond wore. Wear it with highly polished plain toe Oxfords. Yeah, that certainly can make a mind-blowing black tie outfit. Very sharp. Of course, a pleated front shirt is classic, kind of like a piqué, bib sometimes makes an appearance. But I think you can't go wrong with something like this. Of course, more modern designs simply go with a covered placket, which usually saves you the trouble of figuring out a whole set of studs to also go with your shirt, and just perhaps look for cufflinks. So that can be certainly appreciated. And in Dr. No too, actually the shirt is just a voile from Turnbull and Asser probably, but some people say it's the French maker Lanvin. Not sure. What I do like about that shirt is the subtle tone on tone striping on it. So whatever brand actually provided it, whatever maker actually came up with it on this particular occasion, I think it's a great one. Of course, another choice is a kind of cream jacket that we have also seen in that sort of peak lapel design in Sean Connery's rendition of the character from Goldfinger. This is, of course, Daniel Craig from Spectre. And here's the classic Dr. No version again with Sean Connery. And again, I really do like a similar shirt in combination with that cream peak lapel number as well. It's great. This was from Goldfinger. Continuing with some of Bond suits choices, I really like the three-piece Glancheck suit from Goldfinger. It fits so well on Sean Connery. I think that's partly the appeal of it. It's classic cut as it contrasts with the more odd and quirky choices of Goldfinger's outfits. That contrast, I think, between the two of them is one of the reasons I think that this one really shines through. It's beautifully combined here with a knit tie, which I think gives a slightly casual touch with what is otherwise an impeccably turned out style from Sean Connery's Bond. Again, a very commonsensical but perfect number is this mohair and wool suit from Dr. No. One of the things that makes this suit, I think, great is the fact that he arrives in Jamaica with this gray flannel suit, which seems so inappropriate to the climate, and which is the kind of foolish choice that I would make and not Mr. Bond. I'm glad that's quickly remedied by this particular suit, which is mohair mixed in with wool. Mohair is usually used in mixture with wool and sometimes also other materials, even cotton and cashmere, to give an extra bit of stiffness and therefore structure to the fabric, and also a kind of lustrous sheen, which serves Bond well in his seaside appearance here in Dr. No in Jamaica. It's beautifully combined here with a grenadine tie, and that's basically a very distinctive style of tie that you can find from a number of different makers today. I really love the choices and varieties that Drake's, that the London-based brand Drake's has these days. Navy is a great choice, as is the case here. They have different kinds of weaves sometimes, which of course affects the texture, but also the visual appearance of the tie too. It can be a tighter and finer weave, or a larger and therefore also looser weave. I think the attraction is mostly on how it sort of conveys the same sort of relaxed feel as a knitted tie, but in a more structured way. Looks beautiful, but also somewhat airy and casual. The only thing with these kinds of ties is that you have to make sure that your nails are not too long, and that you your hands are not too rugged in a way, because they pull sometimes too easily when you are trying to put them on and take them off. But they're a great look. Here's another look at it. And you'll also see an appearance of those 2-button cocktail cuffs on the Turnbull and Asser shirts too. One note is Ian Fleming quite insistently writes in the book that James Bond wears a 4-in-hand simple knot on his tie, and that he doesn't trust anyone with Windsor, which is the knot that Sean Connery chooses. I find Windsor knots a little too affectatious for my taste, but if you go with a cutaway shirt, and the deeper that cut will be, the more space you will have to fill in. So I understand the the inclination to have a fuller, bigger tie knot. I usually wear Oxford shirts, so for me, a 4-in-hand is plenty. Sometimes some people kind of loop twice around before they tie the 4-in-hand to give a bigger knot. Apparently, the Duke of Windsor himself, whose name was given to this knot, had his ties specifically made for him with thicker lining, so he could tie a simple 4-in-hand, but still have a bigger knot. Ultimately, one doesn't need to make a big deal about the kind of knot that you use at the end of the day. Most people don't even wear a tie these days. So if you're wearing a tie, it is probably a very conscious and intentional choice, and you should certainly develop your own way of wearing it and choose the knot that fits your style, that matches well with the kind of shirts that you wear and with the kind of triangle that you have here, right? Think of it as the room that you have between the two lapels and the edges of your collar, between the collar of your shirt. The tie fits right in there, and it should fill up that space comfortably, elegantly, without overwhelming the rest of the outfit. Mr. GMT, in Quantum of Solace, for the first time, Tom Ford designed suits, the polos, the sunglasses, the fashion was next level. So sexy, my friend. Yes, I love Tom Ford. I was so disappointed that he basically sold his brand and retired. I really do like that brand. I had promised you to bring up the Planet Ocean limited edition for Quantum of Solace, and there it is. I really like the dial design. I don't like the excessive branding, as you know, just in general. The more crowded the dials get, the more it gets to me. But beyond that, I really like the pattern of that dial. Of course, this is the 42 millimeter piece, if I'm not mistaken. We have not gotten to the Seikos and Casios just yet. Hopefully, eventually, we will. I really like this blue herringbone flannel from Goldfinger as well. Again, combined with a knitted tie in this case. Linked cuffs. I should get myself a toupee, a hairpiece, just like Sean Connery. I need it. I need it. I've lost most of my hair. We were talking a little bit about the more casual outfits of Bond as well. I like Lazenby's golf outfit. That fawn suit. It's like a bomber jacket and an orange polo neck worn inside it. One of my favorite fits ever is from the man with the golden gun. Oh, look at that dinner jacket as well. Beautiful double-breasted white with peak lapels. But that wasn't my favorite outfit. In fact, I Heart Maldives was talking about the safari jackets. Roger Moore certainly did it with style. But this must be my favorite. The Glampled sports jacket with the red overcheck. That's my favorite. My absolute favorite. Of course, this movie had no shortage of safari jackets. Here's a sage green number. And here's once again that Glampled sports jacket with the red overcheck with Roger Moore's James Bond across Christopher Lee's Scaramanga, the man with the golden gun. One last look at a detail of that white double-breasted dinner jacket with a beautifully tied bow tie. Brosnan's style as Bond, I think, is incredibly overrated. GoldenEye had many beautiful looks. Of course, starting with a classic peak lapel dinner jacket, black. You can't go wrong with that. Combined with a waistcoat, concealed placket, pleated front. We had highlighted this three-piece, which seems like a subtle throwback to Sean Connery's three-piece in Goldfinger, although this is a darker shade of gray. A lighter gray suit in a more subtle plaid with the Omega Seamaster making an appearance. A tan suit and also the blue double-breasted navy blazer that is worn with the front open. The more tactical gear, a black field jacket or the green camouflage outfit I think, underrated aspects of the Brosnan era. Again, the Omega Seamaster on the wrist. More examples of the safari jackets. Since I Love Maldives brought it up. The cream one from The Man with the Golden Gun with Roger Moore. A kind of safari style sports jacket, again, from The Spy Who Loved Me, with interesting details on the cuff. A kind of shirt jacket from The Moonraker as part of a safari suit. A similar shirt jacket from Octopussy. These numbers were quite distinctive of the Roger Moore era. I would love that. I would love to be a Bond villain. That's like my life's work, my biggest dream. Or that earlier sage green, again from The Man with the Golden Gun. Also, Christopher Lee is one of my favorite actors of all time. That was a great villain that he depicted. Again, availing ourselves of the curation that Matt Spicer did on Bond suits, a number of combinations of blazers, sports jackets with polo necks, with turtlenecks. Here a navy blazer and a cream polo neck. Sean Connery from Diamonds Are Forever. Moonraker. Sean Connery from Never Say Never Again. Although from this angle, he kind of looks like Christoph Waltz, who was later, of course, cast to play the Ernst Stavro Blofeld character in the Daniel Craig cycle. And that's Spicer himself, by the way. Nice. Yeah, this has to be my favorite from this particular selection. Again, I like the outfits, the desert outfit from Spectre. if I can reliably return to that very quickly. Right here. Mr. GMT responds to the earlier Planet Ocean limited edition for Quantum of Solace. Apparently that limited edition was 45.5, and the engraving on the crystal is actually much more subtle than it seems. Nice. The dial design is meant to represent the PPK handle on his gun. Great. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes absolute sense. Thanks for clarifying that, Mr. GMT. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. Now, maybe in the time that remains, we can talk a little bit about your choices, your suggestions for the modern Bond watch, right? In an hypothetical scenario where, in fact, all bets were off. You know, maybe the agreement with Omega has run out. Maybe they're just simply looking for a different kind of product placement, a new endorsement for Bonds, and another brand came to the table. What would it be? Please hit the like button while you're at it. I really appreciate it. For a small channel like this, it makes all the difference. So please do that. If you want to support the channel in some other ways, memberships are a great option, and YouTube, of course, gives you a number of other alternatives too. And if not that, certainly in the description to this video, you have some other alternatives as well. Earlier in a super chat, Maldives had said, I love the narrow jackets. If I could choose a watch for Bond, a new watch for Bond, it would be the 5990A. He was very specific in specifying stainless steel. Of course, the most reliable option for everyday wear. I think as far as complicated versions of the Nautilus goes in the modern lineup, this is probably the most utilitarian. Of course, you know, the Nautilus perpetual calendar that also is offered in a white metal in the reference 5740 is perhaps more complicated. That is a finer watch. That is an ultra thin watch, as we can put it. This is something sportier, more rugged, perhaps more appropriate for daily wear because it's stainless steel on the integrated bracelet, and it combines what is perhaps the most popular sporty complications, and not only for Patek, and that's chronograph and travel time. Of course, here with Patek, you get all the bells and whistles in terms of the two pushers on the left flank of the case that balance out the crown guards that can jump the hour hands in 1 hour increments back and forth. The dial has two apertures to give you day-night indication for both your home/reference time as well as local time. And there's a pointer date at 12 o'clock, which serves as a great counterbalance for that single chronograph register at 12 o'clock, which serves as a 60 minutes counter. This is a modern column wheel vertical clutch chronograph, so the chronograph seconds hand can be left running and used as a reliable seconds hand without introducing any additional friction on the movement. Ali Reza, thank you. 2509. Ali is also a member of the channel. Stop teasing me with a regular schedule and then going dark. It hurts my remaining feeling. What happened? Why remaining? 5990A is literally the only Patek I like, but it's not Bond. Hope you are well. Thank you, man. It's nice to hear from you. The regular schedule is going to come. It's just the transition has just been harder to deal with than I imagined. That's all. Just a lot of complicated feelings. Some mixed in with a nice dose of depression. Some life changes. It's hard. It's hard. Life gets in the way, but I'll be here more reliably for sure. Can't promise just yet to be here every night, but I will be here more often. Billy Jeans was earlier. Ali Reza, of course, joined the discussion, said 5513, which, of course, was worn by George Lazenby, which was worn by Roger Moore, and which is worn here by me in the style that Sean Connery wore his 6538 in Dr. No on a leather strap for tonight. I get the point. 5990 in terms of the canon of watches so far might not strike you as the Bond watch, but if you were to go hunting in the Patek catalog, I have to say Maldives made a good choice. I mean, there's so many more complicated watches. There are watches that try a little too hard, perhaps, for Patek's aesthetics to be cooler, to be sportier, but nothing hits as hard as this. Again, I'm not a huge fan of Nautilus. If I have to choose a Nautilus, I would go with something that is a little more, a little simpler, a little more refined, perhaps, arguably finer, thinner, but 5990 is very distinctive, and in stainless steel, one can hardly go wrong with it. So I think for that reason, it is unorthodox, but certainly a cool choice. 5513, yeah, I think they should go back. why choose a modern watch? You can most certainly go back in time. Frank V has an unorthodox choice as well. Rose gold brightening Navitimer with a spinning bezel to cut steel. Could be interesting. Could be interesting. I think, precious metal Navitimers. I don't really like the Navitimer bracelets. But that being said, I do like the aesthetic of a pink gold Navitimer, like in something like this, for example. I think they had the re-edition in quote unquote red gold as well. That was a beautiful watch. Yeah, right here. Yeah, that could be an interesting choice for a new Bond. Could be a fantastic choice, in fact. See you next time, Mr. GMT. So nice to see you. Thank you. I know we had some other suggestions in the past, but Billie Jean's PhD said Tudor would be a fantastic choice. I would love to see a Black Bay 41 with a date and Cyclops window. A lot of special requests, but BB Heritage, Black Bay Heritage 41 could certainly be interesting. Let's go right in. Let's see, menu. And if we have a little more time, I will try to tip my toes into some of the other watches that have been worn by Bond, including the Breitling Top Time that Sean Connery used in Thunderball, and some of the Seikos and Casios of the Roger Moore era. Yeah, I think Tudor, it would be a great way to catapult Tudor into the next level, because we have seen that Rolex, usually sponsors entire events and competitions, very exceptional individual athletes. But with Tudor, in terms of endorsements, in terms of sponsorships, they're taking a little more liberty. So, in a hypothetical situation where there is some sort of room for a different brand to enter, I can certainly see Rolex making a move with Tudor, even though it would seem like a step back in so many ways. But then again, that's not usually that kind of outright public publicized, transparent kind of product placement is something that Rolex has in the past shied away in the entertainment industry. They like to play that game in the level of of an Ayatollah, so to speak, right? They are kind of above the fray, right? They sponsor the Academy Awards, right? They have the green room. You know, they have each year something special to go with the ceremonies, even if it is just like a well-edited commercial that pays tribute to legendary appearances of Rolex watches over the years in Hollywood movies. So yeah, if there is ever an outright endorsement, it might well be that it is more likely for Tudor. So I wouldn't hold it against them. That Breitling doesn't have a buzz-saw bezel. That's just something that we were fantasizing about in a way. But yeah, it would, you know, that particular design does inspire. It does inspire maybe the intervention. It's kind of a beaded bezel that comes with the re-edition, but the usual perforated design of the Navitimer bezel, I think, could lend itself to making a similar kind of prompt. Okay, so I found, just to close it off, I did find an article that was put together some years back by Watch Time, which, in addition to having a complete timeline, also talks about some of the more obscure watches that were used in the Bond franchise. So let's start with the earliest, which is 1965 Thunderball. In addition to the reference 6538, Sean Connery's Bond uses a Breitling top time as depicted here when he needs a Geiger counter. This watch apparently was rediscovered in 2013 at an English flea market where the authentic prop changed hands for a paltry 25 pounds sterling, soon afterwards to be auctioned for a 5-figure sum. And I'm sure it would still attract a certain kind of collector in today's market too, presumably for an even higher amount. Later, we have a classic dress watch from Grün. This is from the movie You Only Live Twice. Apparently, no one quite made out the watch, but it is suspected to be Connery's personal watch and a golden Grün dress watch with Arabic numerals at the intervals and small seconds at 6. The next non-Rolex watch in the franchise does tap into the Roger Moore era. This was a Pulsar LED watch from Hamilton on the vanguard of the quartz revolution. I think this watch makes an appearance in the opening sequence of Live and Let Die. So it's contemporary with Roger Moore's 5513, the tricked out Basson version that was later sold for about $350,000 by Philips in 2015, if I'm remembering correctly. Here's a Seiko quartz from a later period. (1977) from The Spy Who Loved Me, making its appearance as a Seiko 0674 LC that acts as a pager. A label-making printer inside the watch ejects a strip of paper, or strips of paper rather, bearing important messages from the office of M. In Moonraker, there's another Seiko piece, again, a relic of the quartz revolution. This is an M354 memory bank calendar, an explosive piece, so to speak. It seems the prop department at the time in the Roger Moore era was quite infatuated by these kinds of pieces. Which brings us to For Your Eyes Only. Not one, but two Seikos. The H357 Duo Display, a quartz piece that combines analog and digital, and a Seiko dive watch in the form of the 7549-7009. Here's the Seiko watch from Octopussy, 1983. In A View to Kill, there's another Seiko dive watch. Which is very much, as Dr. Bob points out here, an ancestor of the Commando of Arnold Schwarzenegger's iconic Seiko as well. We have talked about Dalton's Tag Heuer Night Dive from the Living Daylights. And that about rounds things up. Yeah, sorry, no one cares about your opinion, man. You're always my biggest fan, of course, always listening, but clearly never quite getting the point of what I try to put on this show. All right, here we are once again. Thank you so much, iHeart Maldives, for enabling this show, for allowing me to relay this episode on the watches and style from the Bond franchise. We have covered many, if not all, of Bond's watches. Some people have added brilliantly to the conversation, asking great questions, allowing me to elaborate, allowing me to correct some of my mistakes, allowing me to, in fact, go into detail of pieces that I didn't actually prepare to discuss. Thank you again for all of the wonderful people who supported the show with super chats as well. iHeart Maldives, Frank V, multiple times, Mr. GMT again, multiple times, and Ali Reza. For those of my biggest fans who remain silent while learning from the show and only open their mouths when there's just a slight mistake, I don't have anything to say to them. I hope they crawl back to their home. In my future life as a Bond villain, I will hunt them down, but in real life, I'll just send them my best regards. Ali Reza, thank you for your support. 10, I appreciate you. Thank you, everyone. If you have any suggestions, if you have any recommendations, if you have any ideas for future episodes, whether it is a nightly live stream, which are sure to come back, even though Ali Reza will not believe me from now on, or one of these special episodes, please feel free to send me a message. You can easily connect to me at any time, in real time, on Instagram, and that's at young.brando. Of course, feel free to add a comment right here after this live stream concludes. That is really helpful. I respond to every single one of them, whether they are nice and helpful or nasty and vicious. I will most certainly respond, so bring it on. And if you want to support the channel, please avail yourself of all the different options that YouTube provides you. If that's not enough, or if that's not your choice, there are some alternatives listed in the form of links in the video description. Please hit the like button on the way out, and I will see you in the next one. I hope you tune in. I hope you continue leaving comments, leaving your likes, and if you will, sharing the link with your friends and fellow collectors so we can continue growing this community, so I can perhaps have a little more motivation to do more regular live streams. But who knows? Maybe the time is near. Maybe it is already next Monday. Stay tuned. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, wear and enjoy your watches. Bond, Brando, forever. Take care.